we'll often have a lot of sort of deal sources or referrals. So that could be existing founders in our portfolio if we're often a great, source of deal flow for us. That could be other co-investors in the ecosystem, whether they're other seed or pre-seed investors or, multi-stage investors. It could be founders, a huge sign to us. It's like, hey, if we don't have a chance to work with someone, they're still kind enough to send us, a friend who's starting something. Like it's one of the biggest things, we can take. If you're a founder and you're around talented people, one frame is that you're always recruiting. You're always thinking about recruiting. And you want to sort of have a quick elevator pitch to a friend or whatever about what you're doing so that, they get really interested in it. Or they're like, oh yeah, I remember that because it was a quick, 10-second, 30-second soundbite. Like, actually, let me tell my other friend about this. Versus something that's really hard to explain, it's less likely that someone else is going to tell another person about it, right? If anyone can do it. Like, I think all the information is out there. Even if you're in India or you're in a country like, I think all the technology tools are there, the culture's there, and I think anyone can do it. I really do think that. And so, that's maybe what I relay is like sort of capacities within for anyone.
So, hey Aashay, hope you're doing well?
Yeah, hey, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
And all right, so let's just get into it. So, who is Aashay Sanghvi? Just a bit of background.
Yeah, so my name is Aashay Sanghvi. I'm a partner at a venture capital fund in San Francisco called Haystack. I've been here investing now for about 4.5 years. Prior to this, I was in school at Harvard and worked on a couple sort of startup-related things back then as well. And I'm originally from Phoenix, Arizona.
So, all right. In relation to this, you are a partner at Haystack. You built this with SML. And so, what does a partner really do at a VC fund?
Yeah, so I became a partner earlier this year. Like you mentioned, my partner Samil Shah started Haystack in 2013 on his own and has been running it ever since. I joined him in 2019 and have kind of been investing with him and our other colleagues, through that time period as well. What does a partner at Haystack do? Because it is a small fund, regardless of your title within Haystack, I think there's always a lot to do. But what does my job entail? It's everything from sourcing and sort of meeting prospects for starting new companies to taking some time to sort of select and pick the folks that we might end up working with, to oftentimes having to sort of win or close the right to invest in a company, to actually managing the investment, supporting the entrepreneur post-investment. What's sort of unique as well about us is because we're a small fund, so there's also like sort of firm operational strategy to consider, as well as working alongside limited partners and actually raising the Haystack vehicles.
Definitely. So you this was all about what you are doing at Haystack as a partner, but how does it really differ from larger VC funds like Sequoia or A16Z? They have like a gazillion partners, it seems. What differentiates that from a partner at a relatively smaller fund with less number of people? Let's say.
Yeah, it's a good question. And again, I'd preface it by saying, I've never worked inside of a larger venture capital firm. So this is just my impression from knowing folks on the outside. I would say that it feels like there are probably two main differences that I think about. One is that a larger fund, oftentimes what you sort of are supposed to look at from a category perspective, the type of stage you're supposed to focus on, the types of investments that you're focused on are more often than not dictated top down or through the directive of the partnership of like, hey, you need to go focus on fintech, or you're the fintech partner, sort of just like a standard almost division of labor. As well as at larger venture capital firms, you're not really sort of in charge of like, firm strategy or how to think about reserves management or portfolio construction. That, is sort of, with other folks. At Haystack, like, I think we can be a lot more opportunistic. Like I'm often, driven by curiosity and intuition. And it's like, hey, I could wake up one morning and think dev tools are really interesting and try to go chase down a bunch of talented folks in developer tools. Versus that might be less possible within a larger venture fund. And, I try to collect a lot of opinions around, a portfolio construction strategy that sort of makes sense and how to think about Haystack as a firm, to have a point of view and an opinion on it.
I'll pick you on both of these a little bit. You said that as a relatively smaller fund, you can drive a lot of decisions based on your curiosity and based on what you feel right at the moment. But does that go against the whole narrative of being a small fund, that you have to make each and every decision wisely or wiser than as compared to larger firms?
I don't view them at odds with each other. I think, like, I think a lot of it is I think investing is very personal. And, I think you could have an intuition about what feels interesting that day, but, working in a smaller fund, you have that intuition. You have to chase that out of an entrepreneur. You have to sort of articulate to yourself and to your partners, even within the small firm, why is it a compelling investment or why is this person a compelling entrepreneur, in the same way that you would have to at a larger venture fund. But, you sort of live and die by your own sword versus living and dying by committee, which is what would happen at a larger venture capital firm. So I don't view like this sort of following your curiosity and intuition with, thoughtful kind of more intentional approach as at odds with each other. Like I think some of the most successful venture firms of all time, USV, Benchmark, are somewhat opportunistic and somewhat bottoms up in their approach. And you count them as amongst the most thoughtful, sort of reasoned investors. Because I think you need to blend a combination of opportunism, not letting like a lot of historical patterns really blend into your thinking versus understanding like business models, fundamentals, etc.
So do VC firms that are run by operators have a higher chance of succeeding than people who directly get into investing?
I think if you look at the data, I don't know if there's a clear pattern, right? Again, I could point to the sort of canonical examples. Mike Moritz was a journalist, John Doerr, I believe worked at Intel. And so I don't really know if there's one way. I think, maybe I'd highlight the sort of pros and cons of being an operator, the pros and cons of being more of a career investor. And again, I think investing is intensely personal, and you have to really say like, what are my unique skill sets, and does that sort of meet the sort of demand for an investment product in the market? I would say on the operator side, the sort of, and again, the pro is maybe like you might bring a network baked in already. I'd say you might have some sort of, more context and so sort of how to make operational decisions as a company is growing and scaling. And I often think operators can be kind of good board members, like Series A, Series B. And oftentimes as a seed investor, you don't really join a board. So maybe serve a different role. The cons of being an operator is like they often think, they know how to run it better than the founder. These are founders' businesses at the end of the day. The sort of more career investor, I think you have to be very upfront about what you do and what you don't do. I think you have a sort of a cross section into lots of different businesses and less kind of, biases about how things should be done prior. And the con obviously is like you have less authority to sort of make claims on operational choices sort of post investment. But again, I also think that even like the best operators, venture investors over a longer period of time, like truly consider themselves to be venture capitalists. Jim Getz, I think is a great example, the former longtime Sequoia partner. So yeah.
Founders want to work with people. Founders don't, generally speaking, people found. I've never heard anyone say I want to work with A16. Yeah, I want to work with Sequoia. That's just me. People want to work with people, but generally at VC firms, at Haystack in general, how does the deal sourcing really look like? How do you really meet the founders, get to know the founders?
It's a good question. So it's separated again by like sort of inbound versus outbound.
Yeah.
So inbound, to either Sunil or I, we'll often have a lot of sort of deal sources and referrals. So that could be existing founders in our portfolio if we're often a great, source of deal flow for us. That could be other co-investors in the ecosystem, whether they're other seed or pre-seed investors or multi-stage investors. It could be founders, people we know, founders we passed on. Like that's one of the best. That's a huge sign to us. It's like, hey, if we don't have a chance to work with someone, they're still kind enough to send us, a friend who's starting something. Like it's one of the biggest things we can take. And then I would say on the outbound side, twofold in terms of like trying to attract talented people. So, if you're in the sort of Silicon Valley kind of technology ecosystem, my friend who was at Anduril is thinking about leaving, and, you kind of go chase them down. Again, I use that as an example of a company. And then oftentimes I find that these things are sort of very genealogical of like, oh, I'm interested in this idea, and that led me to this article that was written by this person, and then I talked to that person, and then they introduced me to someone, and that could be a 6-month time period, right? I think you have to always kind of be banging down doors, and sort of following your curiosity.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, but I mean, I'm all about the practicality, so I'll try to look for a practical answer in the question, but how much of it is really dependent upon warm intros versus you just meeting new people and investing in them, and like based upon the background of the person? Where is that line differ?
I think a good chunk is based on warm intros.
Why?
I think we don't have to sort of how would I phrase this? When you're an investor, you have a lot of options that sort of can kind of come down your door, and that you're very lucky to have that happen. I would say we know a lot of people. We're a warm introduction away from a lot of people. We still take cold intros in inbounds. But the reason for the warm introduction is like, look, we ultimately have to sort of think about where we spend our time. And, just because we don't invest in a company doesn't mean it's not a great company. I think we want to invest in companies that we feel aligned with, and, we can work with the founders and they want to work with us. And, it's not like a large mega platform where we need to invest in every single company, right? And so the warm introduction is one way to filter in terms of like the types of meetings that we take and the types of people that we work with. And, we have to get warm introductions into entrepreneurs too, right? Like it works the other way. And so is it a perfect system? No, but I think it's one way we think about things, right? And Yeah. And honestly, if you talk to a lot of other investors and ask them the probability of companies that they invested in coal, I don't know the answer that you get either, right? So yeah.
So how does founder really get a warm intro? What makes a perfect warm intro for any investor?
Well, I'd also maybe back up a little bit too. Like just because, the warm introduction comes in doesn't mean we're going to make the investment. Like at the end of the day, the thing that will sort of lead to the investment is like a sort of insight into the market, as well as like an idea for a product or an actual product that is working in some capacity. And so I wouldn't optimize around the warm intro. I would optimize for building something very interesting. And if you do that, I promise people will find you. Like, and so maybe I would just kind of back up a little bit there and like think about that.
But a lot of investors do what you said right now. Most of them say the same thing, that you have to have a traction, you have to have a good product. Then is this pre-seed truly exist?
I think a lot of these things, again, this sort of the nomenclature is like very all over the place, like pre-seed and seed, in the terms shift, right? Like something that looked like a pre-seed today could have been a seed round 2 years ago, right? Like these things evolve. And sure, there are plenty of times that people invest in folks, prior to traction, but like, maybe those people had a background in building businesses at other companies, right? And like they've earned that right. Or they've done the job to go meet investors and kind of do all that and, have some other insight. And so look, is it fair? I'm not sure. But I think it is a system that does work ultimately.
Yeah, you guys have invested in incredible companies, I have to say. When the founders of companies that have done relatively well, when they reach out to you guys, what do you think is different between their pitch versus people who are just doing it for the sake of doing a startup?
I think the more time you spend with this sort of exceptional entrepreneurs, you get the sense that it's like all that they are sort of thinking about. And, like there's no weekend for a really great entrepreneur, right? Like, and oftentimes the sort of personal lives aren't great. Like there's a lot of sacrifice that sort of goes into being an entrepreneur. So that's the one thing that's like, when you spend more time with person, you realize how obsessed they are with building a large company, and they know everything about the space. They know all the ins and outs of like Instacart. Purva could tell you about an individual order level, and he could tell you about the broader strategy of advertising and how they compete with something like Amazon, right? Like you can really go the distance. And the more like entrepreneurs you meet earlier on, like the more you understand how exceptional the exceptional ones are, right? Just because you're spending all that time. And so that is something that sticks out. And I think you can also, something I think about is the sort of specificity in language. So, you're like, hey, what are your goals for next year? And they're like, oh, we want a couple customers and we'd like to hire a couple people, versus the founders. So they're like, we're on track for 30 customers. We'd like to have 15 people on our staff, 10 engineers and 5 go-to-market people. And that is a very different answer. And again, you could criticize it and say that's a semantics question, but I do think that specificity sort of shows how clear someone is about what they're trying to do. And again, you have to meet lots of companies. You have to sort of, quote unquote, kiss a lot of frogs. And through that process, you kind of see who shines through. And oftentimes it's the folks sort of crystal clear in terms of how they articulate not only what they're doing today, but what they're trying to do going forward.
And how much of this is really done over email versus you guys staying a meeting with the founder?
I would say it's multimodal. So we'll have a Zoom call. We can have an in-person meeting. We can have a meal together. We can exchange questions over email. We can, if they've posted blog posts or something like that about what they're doing, we'll look at those, like follow the sort of digital trail as well. So I would describe it as multimodal.
Yeah, that's. Do you believe actually with talking about multimodal? There are a lot of type forms floating around for founders to submit their pitch decks and all those things. Do you really believe that a person should have his or her elevator pitch figured out?
I think so. I think not less so for investors, honestly, but more so for customers and employees. Like, if you're a founder and you're around talented people, one frame is that you're always recruiting. You're always thinking about recruiting. And you want to sort of have a quick elevator pitch to a friend or whatever about what you're doing so that, they get really interested in it. Or they're like, oh, yeah, I remember that because it was a quick, 10-second, 30-second soundbite. Like, actually, let me tell my other friend about this. Versus something that's really hard to explain, it's less likely that someone else is going to tell another person about it, right? That's why I think the elevator pitch is important, because I think there's some business building value here to prospective employees, to customers, as well as future investors.
How does this really come in line with very innovative companies? Like, we are in 2007. Steve Jobs and you're in an elevator together. He tells you that I'll allow you to tap on a screen and call people. How does that really work with companies that are very innovative?
Oftentimes, I think in the very innovative companies, the end result is very simple, right? We have built a supercomputer in your phone. We've built a store that delivers you anything wherever you are. Uber, press a button and go anywhere, right? Like, but the way in which it happens is very, like, that takes a lot of work, right? Like, there's a lot that goes under this behind the hood at Apple. And so I think the great companies are simple in terms of their sort of end value proposition, but the manner through which that sort of manifests in the world is quite complicated, and either uses novel technology or process or combination of things.
From what perspective do you really look at when looking at either pitch deck or talking to a founder? Do you look at it from an exit perspective or the customer's perspective?
So I'll leave aside the sort of founder heuristics because I talked about some of those.
Yep.
I would say we look at more through the lens of like, what is the clear value proposition to the user, the customer? Either whether they're using and they can get a lot of value from it, or they're purchasing it and they can get a lot of value from it. And I always try to approach it from that lens. And then after that, you're like, okay, if that is true, and that is very like, there's a lot of customer love or whatever, where can you expand on that, right? And is that something that can grow and scale, or you can deliver multiple products to you over time? But I always start more with the end customer and the value proposition that the product has, versus being like, oh, this is a $100 billion market, and we're going to take 30% of it, and this is a business model and all that. Like, I think those you figure out after the customer value proposition.
Does the market size really matter?
This is a hard one, because ultimately it actually does, right? Because in order to build $1 billion revenue business, you need at least $1 billion market, right? Like, that sort of supports that. But I think the sort of like top-down TAM analysis is very flawed early on. And like, again, if you think about the things that you should care about, like the sort of parameters that you should care about when you're looking at early stage investment, I think because there's a lot of noise in the market size parameter, like you should underweight that in your calculus. And again, I'm more of like a market growth person, right? Like, is this fast growing? Is there a lot of customer adoption? The other issue with market TAM analysis is like, how do you define a market? Right. Again, the sort of Tealian view is like, is Google in the digital ads market? Is it in the consumer media market? Right. Like, how do you define these things? So that's why I think TAM analysis has a lot of noise earlier on.
Talking about TAM analysis, how much should a founder really niche down into the market to figure out the nitty-gritty of their specific market versus as a whole of the entire market?
I mean, I think they should know their market better than anyone. And again, it's how do they define their market? But whatever the domain space of what they're working in, they should know better than anyone. Like, better than competitors, better than investors, better than customers, right? Like, I think that's the project of the founder.
Definitely, for sure. I think I'll pivot here a little bit. We're talking about how you assess companies, but a very major role in assessing companies is played by pitch decks. They're a pain for people. They look at examples of Airbnb, Uber, but practically speaking, what is a pitch deck? What is the use of a pitch deck?
It's one way of visually communicating information, right? Like, so you could have a written memo, you could have a pitch deck, you could have a video, but it's one way of just creating collateral for the company. And it oftentimes, people have been using forms of pitch decks since the 1940s or 1950s. Like, it has lasted a little bit of time. And it's one way of just sort of visually communicating information. I don't think they're an end all be all, right? But it's just kind of one way of doing these things.
What should a pitch deck look like from a founder's perspective?
Again, everyone has their own specific sort of views here. I'm more on the like, I kind of like, getting a sense of the team earlier on in the pitch deck. I think getting a sense of the traction. Again, like, I always think people put traction way too late in their decks. Clear sense of the problem and a clear sense of the solution, as well as the kind of like maybe what I define as like act 1, act 2, act 3 of the company of like, okay, we're starting here, then we're going here, and then ultimately we'll end here. And that's the sort of general structure that I like. I often find that people spend too much time. I would say the two big mistakes I see people making are they put traction too late, and they spend way too many slides talking at a high level about the problem. Like, I think you can sort of punch through the problem and be like, this is the main issue.
What does the story arc of the best pitch deck in your opinion look
like? I would say that it's also the other issue is like it's very company dependent. But again, the story arc is like, hey, here's what we've done today. This is the clear insight that we have about why we're going to win. And this is exactly kind of what's going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months plus 5 years onwards, right?
How far do you really look at when assessing the company in order to make the investment decision?
Because we invest so early at seed, pre-seed and seed, I would say our hyper focus is really on the next 12 months post-investment. Ultimately, we do want these companies to build long-term enduring franchises that sort of accumulate a lot of value, but you can't get there on day one. And I find that oftentimes it's really just about de-risking a couple of key things in this first year or so. to then be like, okay, now we're on the path and we can think about this longer term strategy. But I think more about the tactical things of like, we need to really hire this one specific person, or we need to like have 3 customers that really like it. That's all that matters. Versus, marketing and conferences and business development. Like, I don't know. It can be a lot of noise.
You talked a little bit of like the customer part there. So one thing that I think I've been reading a lot about these days is in today's scenario, we'll forget about the generalization. In today's world, do you think founders should find product market fit before they raise this or after it?
I think that you should try to find product market fit as soon as possible. That being said, to your point, like the practicalities of it are different. And so oftentimes when you raise a seed round, I would have a very clear theory of what product market fit looks like to you. You may or may not have it, but then I would use the seed capital to really go get it. So that's kind of how I view it.
Where does the seed capital really go in finding PMF?
Oftentimes it just goes to engineering, product. Just like, hey, can we hire a few people and maybe one business person or a go-to-market person or something? And can we support this team of 5 or 6 people? It's not too big, it's not too small, with a couple of years of runway to really find product market fit. But oftentimes the seed money really just goes to personnel. Like cloud costs are a very small part of it. Now these days, office costs, TBD, more variable. You shouldn't really be paying a lot to acquire customers early on. Like, I don't really believe in that. So it's really just headcount for product and R&D.
A founder does all that. The smart founder does all that. A person who wants to really solve the problem does all that. But when it comes to actually pitching to investors, aside from the pitch deck and the type form and all those things, how should the founder really pitch to investors? Like in terms of face to face, like meeting investors and speaking with them. How should the founder really go about doing that?
It depends, I think, whether you're fundraising at that moment or not. Like if you are not fundraising, let's say you meet an investor and you're sort of just getting to know one another. Oftentimes you're going to want to know your personal story, why you're building what you're building, what you've sort of done today with the proceeds. And if I were a founder and I'm meeting an investor and, I have something kind of working in my business, I would really use that, to my advantage to be like, hey, I'm dealing with this one business problem. Like, how would you think about it? To test the investor's own capacity to be kind of a business partner and a sounding board, the entrepreneur, or like, hey, I saw you were connected to this enterprise customer. Can you introduce me? Again, to test that capacity. When you're like actually going to the meeting, I think a lot of people are just not as direct, even on the founder side. Like they kind of have these chats with investors and they're like, oh, we might raise one day, and there's less like, hey, I'm going to walk you through my materials. I'd love to like have a Q&A kind of after, but I want to walk you through like exactly what we're doing, articulate the vision to you, and give you the sort of concrete asks of why we're raising $10 million, $50 million, $2 million. And, we can have a discussion about it, but we are raising capital and it is on a sort of timeline. And I think like you sort of need to be a bit more assertive. And so, that maybe be my approach.
How much of you have, and a lot of companies have taken money from you guys, have raised money from you guys. How do you think founders, from your experience, how do you think founders assessed you as an investor or Haystack as an investor in general?
Well, hopefully positively. And a lot of the interactions you have with an entrepreneur inform the sort of reputation. It could be all the texts you have back and forth, the actual calls, when they've asked you for something, have you actually delivered upon it? And, I think we take that extremely seriously, when we work at, I would say, if you were to sort of ask founders about us, it's like, hey, they are, they speak their mind. They are direct and open and honest. They are very, very supportive of me as a person, first and foremost, and, the company. They sort of push us when things are going well and seek to pull us up when things are not going as well. And they have good instincts and impulse on where the market's at in terms of future financing, other VCs, et cetera, and have really helped, the companies raise lots of capital through the life cycle to eventually be, multi-billion-dollar kind of enterprises. And, like don't really get in our way.
Last week, how do you keep, like, don't get in their way, but still help them?
It's a good question. I think a lot about earlier on, once you've made it through, making this sort of investment and that initial time period post-investment, are you honestly just spending a lot of time with the entrepreneur in a way that they're comfortable with and open with to just like build more context, right? Like, do I understand you as a person? Do I understand how you learn things as a person? Do I understand what motivates you? Do I understand where you're trying to take the company? And as an investor and a founder, and for the founder to be like, oh, Aashay does this and he likes this and he thinks this way, and this is a flaw of his. Like, is there a lot of shared context? So then you can say, okay, now you're building a company, building a product. But if you call me and ask for my advice on something, I have that shared context to say like, oh, this is how I make a decision based off, what we sort of originally talked about. Right. And so that's kind of how I think about it. And a lot of it's very interpersonal. Like, hopefully they like you and they want to share things with you, or they feel comfortable sharing things with you. Versus like, oh, we're going to have a board meeting like every 2 weeks and talk about blah, blah, blah. Like, it's a lot more forced in my opinion.
Oh, definitely love the point about the shared context. I think I'll just ask one last thing that you'd like to end with. I've been into, like you're talking about, I've been into startups and VCs since I was 11. What do you think is one fact that would blow 11-year-old me mind?
Whoa. I don't even know where to begin. I don't know. I don't know if it's a fact, but and perhaps it's naive, but I really do believe anyone can do it. Like, I think all the information is out there. If anything, what needs to be updated is immigration policy. But even if you're in India or you're in a country like, I think the sort of people can tap into their own capacity to build something very big. Like, all the technology tools are there, the culture's there, and I think anyone can do it. I really do think that. And so, that's maybe what I relay is like sort of capacities within, for anyone.
Oh, yeah. That blew 15-year-old me mind. I'll say that. I think this has been incredible. I hope you enjoyed it. I think that's it from my side. Anything you'd like to say?
No, I think you're doing a great job here, and it was exciting to be here, and I appreciated the sort of back and forth. Yeah.